Okay, today so we're going to look at a game of polo with a headless goat, which is on page 15 and 16 of your anthology. We drove off to find the best viewing spot, which turned out to be the crest of the hills so we could see the approaching race. I asked the lads if we could join in the wacky races and follow the donkeys, and they loved the idea. We'll open the car boot, you climb inside and point your camera towards the race. As the donkeys overtake us, we'll join the cars. But will you try and get to the front? Oh yes, that's no problem. But the first point I'd make about that is that you've got that direct speech, and wherever you get direct speech in one of these non-fiction texts, then try and work out why the direct speech is being used. And very often it will be to engage the reader and to make you feel as if you're there at that moment. So the use of the direct speech rather than it just being reported or indirect speech makes it feel very real, like as if you're involved in the situation. Carry on with line 6. The two lads who had never been interested in this Karachi sport were suddenly fired up with enthusiasm. We waited for eternity on the brow of a hill, me perched in the boot with a zoom lens pointing out. Nearly 1 hour later, I was beginning to feel rather silly when the only action was a villager on a wobbly bicycle who nearly fell off as he cycled past and gazed around at us. The waited for eternity could be a good point that's worth picking out, because it's to do with building suspense. So a lot of these first 2 or 3 paragraphs is to do with building suspense before you get to the donkey race. So the waited for eternity, and then in the next paragraph where it says several vehicles went past and some donkey carts carrying spectators. Are they coming? We called out. Coming, coming, came the reply. I was beginning to lose faith in its happening, but the lads remained confident. So that waited for eternity and the coming, they build up that suspense, don't they? Just going back to that second paragraph, there's a really good example there that you can pick out of humour. Now, you might not have laughed out loud when you read it, okay, but if you look at that idea of her perching at the back of the boot of the car with her zoom lens, desperately waiting for the donkey race, and then it says, nearly 1 hour later, this is on lines 8 to 10, nearly 1 hour later, I was beginning to feel rather silly when the only action was a villager on a wobbly bicycle who nearly fell off as he cycled past and gazed around at us. That's meant to be funny, isn't it? So that use of humour there, just that creation of quite a comical image. Now, one of the things, I'm going to talk in another video about this at some point, one of the things that you can talk about here is what's the purpose of this sentence or this chunk of writing. Try to look at what the purpose of different sections of the writing are. Sometimes you'll find sections which are written to narrate or to describe. That bit is very much to entertain, so to create humour, to create like a little bit of light relief in the whole thing. Line 14 onwards. Just as I was assuming that the race had been cancelled, we spotted 2 approaching donkey carts in front of a cloud of fumes and dust created by some 50 vehicles roaring up in their wake. As they drew nearer, Yaqub revved up the engine and began to inch the car out of the lay-by. The 2 donkeys were almost dwarfed by their entourage, but there was no denying their speed. The Qibla donkey is said to achieve speeds of up to 40 kilometers per hour, and this looked close. The 2 were neck and neck, their jockeys perched on top of the tiny carts, using their whips energetically, though not cruelly. You could pick out those adverbs, actually, which are quite interesting, that energetically, though not cruelly. And I think the reason why she uses those 2 adverbs there, and there's a bit of a contrast between them, that, okay, they're energetic, they're enthusiastic with the race, and they're putting a lot of effort into it, but they're not doing it cruelly. I think the reason why she's doing this is that otherwise you could think, as the reader of this text, you could think, hang on a minute, what about the animal welfare? What about the donkeys here? Shouldn't we be concerned about their welfare? I think what she's trying to do is she's trying to show that she's thought of that and she's weighed that up, and on balance she thinks, well, okay, yes, it is energetic, this is a serious sport, but they're not doing it cruelly. So she's trying to kind of deflect some of that criticism that she might have got otherwise if you just thought, oh, I don't approve of this on animal welfare grounds. She's trying to deflect some of that potential criticism, isn't she? The other thing that you can pick out from this is on lines 18 to 19, where it says the Qibla donkey is said to achieve speeds of up to 40 kilometers per hour. Remember, we were looking at, what's the purpose of different chunks of writing? The purpose of that bit there is to inform, isn't it? We had a bit earlier on which was to entertain. That bit is very much to inform, to give you information. Line 21. The noise of the approaching vehicles grew, horns tooting, bells ringing, and the special rattles used for this purpose, like maracas, the metal container filled with dried beans. Men standing on top of their cars and vans, hanging out of taxis and perched on lorries, all cheered and shouted while the vehicles jostled to get to the front of the convoy. I would pick out those verbs there, those participles, tooting and ringing. And first of all, they're examples of sensory description, aren't they? Because it's to do with sound. But also, I think very often, if you have lots of ing participles, it creates this sense of chaos and action, doesn't it? So all the ing participles here help to create that sense of lots and lots of action, lots of chaos going on around. Line 26. Yakub chose exactly the right moment to edge out of the crowd and swerve in front of the nearest car, finding the perfect place to see the two donkeys and at the front of the vehicles. This was Formula One without rules, or a city centre rush hour gone anarchic. Again, more humour there, isn't it? A complete flouting of every type of traffic rule and common sense. They're both also metaphors, aren't they? This was Formula One without rules, well, not literally, okay? Or a city centre rush hour gone anarchic. They're comparisons, aren't they? They're metaphors to create that sense of chaos and busyness at that moment. Line 30. Our young driver relished this unusual test of driving skills. It was survival of the fittest and depended on the ability to cut in front of the vehicle with a sharp flick of the steering wheel. No lane discipline here. Quick reflexes to spot a gap in the traffic for a couple of seconds. Nerves of steel and an effective horn. There's the skill here, I think, is emphasised, isn't it? There were two races, the motorised spectators at the back, in front of the two donkeys, still running close and amazingly not put off by the uproar just behind them. Ahead of the donkeys, oncoming traffic, for it was a main road, had to dive into the ditch and wait there until we had passed. Yakub loved it. We stayed near to the front, his hand permanently on the horn, and his language growing more colourful with every vehicle that tried to cut in front. He's obviously really enjoying it, isn't he, this driving, Yakub? And you can tell you've got that short sentence, just a 3-word sentence, Yakub loved it. And the short 3-word sentence there emphasises how much he's in his element. He's really enjoying the challenge here and the excitement of the whole thing, isn't he? It also says that his language was growing more colourful. Now that basically means he's starting to swear a bit because he's excited and it's tense and everything. And language-wise, in terms of technique here, you can say that he's using a euphemism, E-U-P-H-E-M-I-S-M. So she's using this euphemism about his language growing more colourful. Basically, she means he's swearing. But you could say that this euphemistic expression, this euphemism, shows that he was swearing because he was so excited and because he's so tense. Okay? Line 39. The road straightened and levelled, and everyone picked up speed as we neared the end of the race. But just as they were reaching the finish line, the hospital gate, there was a near pile-up as the leading donkey swerved, lost his footing, and he and the cart tumbled over. The race was over. You just got another 4-word sentence there at that point, haven't you? And it's a short sentence to emphasise that it's the end of the race. But then the next paragraph begins, and then the trouble began. It's almost like we've reached this climax, we've reached this point that we thought was the end, and then it all starts up again, doesn't it? So that's a kind of like a pivotal, significant moment in the narrative where you think you've reached an end, and then you actually realise this whole new section of the story, this dispute about who's won the race, is now starting from this point onwards. Line 43. I assumed the winner was the one who completed the race, but it was not seen that way by everyone. Apart from the 2 jockeys and officials who it turned out were actually monitoring the race, there were over 100 punters who had all staked money on the race and therefore had strong opinions. Some were claiming that the donkey had fallen because the other one had ridden too close to him. Voices were raised, fists were out, and tempers rising. Jot down that list of 3 there, okay, and it adds to the tension, doesn't it? Everyone gathered around one jockey and official while the bookmakers were trying to insist that the race should be rerun. Yakub and Iqbal were nervous of hanging around a volatile situation. Volatile situation. We've got an adjective and then a noun, haven't we? So that's emotive pre-modification. Volatile situation. They agreed to find out for me what was happening, ordering me to stay inside the car as they were swallowed up by the crowd. They emerged sometime later. It's still not resolved, said Iqbal, but starting to get nasty. I think we should leave. As we drove away, Yaqub reflected on his driving skills. I really enjoyed that, he said, as we drove off at a more sedate pace, but I don't even have my licence yet because I'm underage. Again, there's more humour here, isn't there? She didn't realise this, and she's thinking, oh my goodness, if I'd realised that, I'd never have let you drive. They both found this hilarious, but I was glad he hadn't told me before. An inexperienced underage driver causing a massive pile-up in the middle of a high-stakes donkey race could have caused problems. So make sure you've got all those examples of linguistic terminology and those examples jotted down, but more important, try to say what's the effect. How does it describe the race? How does it describe the people? What impact does it have on you in terms of what emotions or what thoughts go through your mind when you're reading that particular section?